Welcome to our deep dive into the world of companies that have thrived for centuries.
Oh, yeah.
We're going to be exploring Arie de Geus's book, The Living Company. We're going to be exploring the secrets of their longevity and what makes them different. Why do some companies flourish while others fade?
Yeah, that's a really fascinating question. And it's something that de Geus really tackles head on in the book.
Yeah.
And I think one of the most fundamental things he does is he really challenges this traditional view of companies as machines.
Okay.
And instead, he says, no, we need to view companies as living organisms.
Okay.
And that's such a crucial shift in perspective because it changes how we understand a company's potential, their potential for growth, their potential for adaptation, and even their potential for regeneration.
So instead of like rigid structures, they're more like dynamic, almost evolving entities.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, one of the key takeaways from the book. He's really emphasizing this ability of companies to learn from their experiences and to adapt to their environment just like a living being would.
It's interesting because, I think a lot of times people, get so caught up in profits and short-term gains. But he's really looking at what makes them last, for the long haul.
Exactly.
He found that the average lifespan of a Fortune 500 company is only 40 to 50 years.
Wow.
But the companies that he studied have survived for centuries.
It's an incredible contrast, isn't it? It really makes you think about the potential versus the reality.
Totally.
And what are those factors that contribute to that kind of longevity? And that's where I think de Geus's insights are so valuable. He's really unpacked those elements, those characteristics that these companies share.
Yeah, and he came up with 4 key characteristics, and one of them is this idea of sensitivity to the environment. How do these companies, stay ahead of the curve? Do they have a crystal ball, or is there something more to it?
Well, I wouldn't say it's about predicting the future with absolute certainty, but it is about being receptive to change.
Okay.
And developing this kind of sensitivity. He has a great anecdote in the book about the mayor of Rotterdam in the 1920s. Oh, wow.
And imagine you were told about every major event that's going to unfold over the next 25 years, economic crises, war, even the bombing of your own city.
Oh, wow.
Would you act on such a grim prediction, even if it came true?
I don't know. Probably not.
Right.
I think as humans, we tend to, kind of downplay those things where we think it's not going to happen to us.
Exactly.
And then all of a sudden, something, a crisis hits and you're not prepared.
Exactly. And de Geus's point is that even with perfect foresight, action is not guaranteed.
Okay.
So what matters is being receptive to change and cultivating the sensitivity to the environment.
So it's not about, like getting every detail right, but it's kind of like opening your mind up to all those different things that might be coming down the pike.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And that's where I think scenario planning becomes so powerful.
Oh, yeah.
Because instead of fixating on a single prediction of the future, successful companies, they explore multiple plausible scenarios. And you mentioned scenario planning. Can you give an example of that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Shell is a great example. De Geus worked at Shell.
Right.
And he talks about how they developed multiple scenarios.
Okay.
So they weren't trying to predict the one definitive future. They were exploring different possibilities.
Okay.
So, for example, they looked at different potential events and their impact on the oil industry.
Right.
And through that process, they were able to anticipate some really significant events. Like, for example, they anticipated the 1970s energy crises.
Wow.
They anticipated the rise of energy conservation and even the breakup of the Soviet Union.
Wow.
So, by exploring those different possibilities, they were much better prepared to navigate those challenges when they arose.
So it's almost like instead of being caught flat-footed, it's having that toolkit ready for whatever might be coming.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So that's that sensitivity to the environment, really acknowledging that the future is full of possibilities and being prepared for a range of outcomes. Now, in addition to that external adaptation, de Geus also highlights the importance of internal cohesion.
Okay.
And that's where this concept of a cohesive and strong sense of identity comes in.
And how does that contribute to their longevity?
Well, these companies, despite their size and complexity, they cultivate a strong sense of community, a strong sense of shared values.
Okay.
So that their employees, regardless of their role, their location, they feel a deep connection to the company's mission and identity.
And that must play a huge role in their motivation and their commitment to the company.
Absolutely.
It's almost like they see the company as an extension of their own identity in a way.
Right.
And, it reminds me of de Geus's metaphor of the company as a river.
Yes, the river analogy. It's a really beautiful way to illustrate this concept.
Because the river is constantly flowing,
Yeah.
right? So there's always new talent, new ideas coming in,
Right.
but it maintains that same identity over time.
Exactly. The river carves its path, it adapts to obstacles, it changes conditions, but it remains a river.
It's always a river. Yeah. That's a great way to look at it. Speaking of identity, I had an interesting experience with a colleague early in my career. A character we'll just call Mr. Z.
Okay, Mr. Z. I think I've heard you mention Mr. Z before.
Yeah, Mr. Z and I was a young, eager accountant, and he was, let's just say we had very different approaches to everything.
I see.
And we would clash constantly. And I didn't understand why my boss kept putting us on the same projects together. But he sat me down one day, my boss. He was a wise old controller, and he gave me some advice.
What did he tell you?
And it's something I've never forgotten. He said, young man, if you want to be a leader, you must realize that a manager is not God.
Okay.
A manager does not create people, and a manager does not change people. So you have to work with people as you find them.
That's a profound statement.
It is.
Yeah.
And he said, focus on creating conditions where people will voluntarily give their best. And you know what? Despite all of our differences,
Yeah.
Mr. Z and I, we learned to work together. We were both part of the same team, the same river.
The same river.
And that shared identity really helped us both to succeed.
So it was that shared identity, that connection to something larger than yourselves,
Right.
that allowed you to bridge those differences.
Exactly.
That's a powerful example. And it really speaks to the importance of creating that kind of cohesive culture where individual differences can be transcended and where everyone feels like they're contributing to a shared goal.
Yeah.
And that's something that these long-lived companies are remarkably good at doing.
They're really good at building that strong culture.
It's a key part of their DNA.
Yeah.
And it's a fascinating how that principle applies not just to individuals, but to the entire company.
And the company as a whole.
Yeah, right. Building that sense of community, building that shared identity. It's like setting a strong foundation for a long-lasting organization. It really is. And it brings us to another fascinating characteristic that Geus identified, and that's tolerance for activities and experiments outside the core business.
That's interesting because it seems like today, every business guru is preaching about laser focus. And sticking to your core competencies.
Right.
But he's suggesting that these companies actually embrace a degree of, like creative chaos.
Yeah.
Is that a good way to put it?
I think that's a great way to put it. They're remarkably tolerant of experimentation,
Okay.
of activities that might appear to be peripheral to their core business at first glance.
So instead of like shutting down anything that doesn't fit neatly into their existing business model, they're encouraging people to explore beyond those boundaries.
Exactly. They create space for what Geus calls activities in the margins. So think of these as the outliers, the experiments, the eccentricities that stretch the company's understanding of what's possible.
Okay.
They might not be immediately profitable,
Okay.
but they hold the potential for future growth and adaptation.
So they're kind of like constantly scouting new terrain.
Yeah.
Pushing the boundaries of their comfort zone and just, kind of planting seeds for the future.
Precisely. And when the time is right, those seemingly marginal activities can blossom into new core businesses.
Oh, okay.
You look at DuPont, for example, their expansion into chemicals, or Sumitomo's venture into banking.
Wow.
Both of those were branching out from their initial areas of expertise.
It's a good reminder that clinging to what worked in the past,
Yeah.
Can actually be your downfall.
Absolutely.
Especially in a world that's changing so rapidly.
Yeah.
You have to be willing to experiment and explore the unknown.
The innovate or die principle in action.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Speaking of survival, let's talk about another characteristic that Geus discovered, and that's conservative financing, which I think resonates with anyone who's ever had to, manage a budget.
Right.
Financial prudence is always a virtue.
Absolutely.
So what did Geus learn about the financial habits of these long-lived companies?
Well, he found that they were incredibly careful with their capital.
Okay.
They avoided excessive debt, and they prioritized long-term stability over short-term gains.
Okay.
They saw financial prudence as a form of self-preservation,
Okay.
a way to maintain their independence and their flexibility.
So it's almost like building a strong financial foundation so that you can weather any unexpected storms that might come along.
That's a great way to put it. Think of it like building a strong immune system for the company.
Right.
And Geus highlights a really interesting study by an entrepreneur named John Onions.
Okay.
And Onions analyzed the financial habits of startup businesses.
Okay.
And he found a striking correlation between debt and failure.
Really?
Startups that relied heavily on debt were much more likely to go under compared to those that remained debt-free.
That makes sense. You know, debt can be a heavy burden, especially for a young company
Absolutely.
trying to find their, gain a foothold.
Yeah.
But how does that apply to more established companies?
Well, the principle holds true, I think, regardless of the company's age.
Okay.
Excessive debt limits your options.
Okay.
It makes you vulnerable to economic downturns.
Right.
And it forces you into these short-sighted decisions.
So it's about more than just being stingy. It's about creating that margin of safety.
Exactly.
That breathing room that allows for long-term thinking.
Exactly. It's about ensuring the company's resilience.
Right.
Their ability to navigate those unforeseen challenges.
Yeah, and I think, all this sounds great in theory, but how do you balance these principles of longevity with the pressures of, the modern business world?
Right.
I mean, it's like you're constantly, being pulled in two directions. You need that short-term, profit, but you also want to make sure that the company's going to be around for the long haul.
It's a constant tension, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
And Geus has some really interesting ideas about how to navigate that tension.
Okay.
And one of the most fascinating is this concept of flocking.
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 Like birds.
Like birds.
What do birds have to do with business?
Well, it's all about knowledge sharing and adaptability. Have you heard the story of the blue tits and the milk bottles?
No, I don't think so.
So back in early 20th century, Britain milkmen would deliver milk in glass bottles with foil caps.
Okay.
And blue tits, being clever creatures, they figured out how to peck through the foil to get to the cream.
Okay.
And what's remarkable is that this behavior spread rapidly through the entire blue tit population.
Wow.
Not through genetics, but through social learning.
So they were watching each other?
They were observing each other, mimicking successful strategies, essentially sharing knowledge within their community.
So they created a sort of collective intelligence.
Exactly.
That helped them to adapt and thrive.
Yeah.
Exactly. So Geus connects this flocking behavior to the importance of job mobility and knowledge sharing within companies.
So instead of keeping people siloed in, their specialized departments,
right,
it's more about encouraging them to move between different projects, different roles.
Right.
So that they're cross-pollinating those ideas.
Exactly. When employees move between departments, projects, roles, they cross-pollinate ideas. They spread knowledge organically throughout the organization.
That makes a lot of sense. So how can companies encourage this, this flocking behavior?
Well, it doesn't happen by chance.
Right.
Companies can cultivate flocking through training programs that bring together diverse teams, encourage mentoring knowledge exchange, and foster a culture of continuous learning.
So it's really about creating that environment where knowledge flows freely.
Exactly. It's about creating that dynamic ecosystem where knowledge flows freely and where individuals learn and adapt collectively.
So it sounds like flocking can also be a way to kind of evaluate human potential.
Absolutely. Geus points to Shell's system of peer assessments,
Oh,
where teams of employees would regularly evaluate each other's potential and performance.
So it's more like a holistic approach to performance management.
Exactly. It moves beyond that traditional top-down model.
Right.
And it ties back to this idea of the company as a living being.
Right.
A community where individuals are constantly learning and growing together.
And flocking is a great way to, prevent those silos and that lack of communication.
Absolutely. It's a key ingredient in building a company that can thrive for generations.
Yeah. And Geus argues that, viewing companies as just these economic machines really limits their lifespan and their potential.
Precisely. It's about recognizing the human element, the community, the shared purpose.
And that brings us to another element of Geus's framework, and that's distribution of power.
Yes.
So what did he uncover about how these long-lived companies approach power dynamics?
Well, he found that while they may have formal hierarchies, these companies distribute power more widely than you might expect. They understand that concentrating power in the hands of a few can be detrimental to the company's long-term health.
It seems counterintuitive, though, because wouldn't a centralized authority make things more efficient?
It might seem that way on the surface, but Geus argues that it can actually stifle innovation and adaptability.
Okay.
So instead of clinging to this illusion of control, long-lived companies, they embrace decentralization and they empower individuals and teams at all levels of the organization.
So it's not about, relinquishing control entirely, but it's more about shifting the power dynamic so that there's more engagement and ownership throughout the company.
That's a great way to put it. And Geus offers a fascinating example from Shell to illustrate this point.
Okay.
Remember, Shell was formed through a merger of two parent companies, Royal Dutch and Shell Transport and Trading, back in 1907.
Wow.
It was a cross-cultural merger.
That must have been quite the undertaking.
It was. And what's remarkable is that despite that potential for conflict, Shell developed this dual-headed structure. A system of checks and balances that distributed power between those two parent companies.
So this seemingly complex structure actually contributed to their long-term success.
It did.
Wow.
Geus argues that this distribution of power fostered a wider engagement of minds in decision-making.
Okay.
Ultimately leading to better outcomes and enhanced learning.
So it was almost like instead of imposing a single top-down vision.
Right.
They created a system where multiple perspectives were heard and considered.
Precisely. And this approach, while perhaps appearing messy or inefficient at first glance, actually fostered greater adaptability and resilience.
So the illusion of control can actually be detrimental.
It can be very seductive, but it often comes at the expense of creativity and innovation.
Yeah, so it's not about dismantling hierarchies altogether. But it's about finding that balance.
Finding that balance.
Creating a structure that allows for those diverse voices to contribute.
Exactly. And this ties into another important concept that Geus highlights, and that's upward impediments.
Upward impediments.
Upward impediments.
What are those?
So it refers to mechanisms that allow employees at lower levels to push back against decisions or initiatives coming from higher levels of management.
So it's about creating those channels for constructive criticism.
Exactly.
Making sure that those alternative viewpoints are heard.
Exactly. Geus argues that upward impediments are crucial for preventing groupthink.
Okay.
And ensuring that decisions are made with a full understanding of their potential consequences. It's about fostering a culture where everyone feels empowered to speak up, to challenge assumptions. And to contribute to the company's learning process.
It makes a lot of sense because it creates a more, dynamic and responsive organization.
It does.
One that's open to feedback and continuous improvement.
It does, and it requires a degree of trust, both in your employees' capabilities and their commitment to the company's overall well-being.
Yeah, it's fascinating how, distributing power, letting go of the reins a little bit actually strengthens the organization. Creates a more engaged and responsive ecosystem.
It really does. And I think Geus's book offers a really radical way to reframe how we think about companies. It's not just about profits or short-term gains. It's about cultivating this living, evolving organism that's capable of adapting to the ever-changing world.
And his insights are more relevant now than ever. When so many companies are struggling to keep up with the pace of change.
Absolutely.
It's a really powerful message about building not just for success, but for true sustainability.
Exactly. And what I find even more remarkable is that so many of the principles that he outlines in the book apply to so much more than just businesses. Think about sensitivity to the environment, a strong sense of identity tolerance for experimentation, conservative financing, flocking distributed power. These are principles that can apply to any organization, any community, even our own personal lives.
It's really about cultivating that mindset of continuous learning, adaptation, collaboration. Recognizing that, we're all part of these interconnected systems and our actions have ripple effects.
Absolutely.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the living company, let's recap some of the key takeaways for our listeners.
Okay.
I think it's valuable to, distill it down into some actionable insights. What would you say are the top 10 takeaways from our exploration today?
Ooh, top 10. All right, let's give it a shot. Number 1, the average lifespan of a Fortune 500 company is a mere 40 to 50 years. Which I think serves as a stark reminder that even the most successful companies can be surprisingly short-lived.
Number 2, companies should be viewed not as rigid machines, but as living beings capable of learning, adapting, and regenerating. That shift in perspective is really fundamental to understanding their potential for longevity.
It is. Number 3, Long-lived companies cultivate a deep sensitivity to their environment, constantly scanning for emerging trends and adapting to change over time.
Yeah.
They understand that the world is in constant flux, and they embrace that dynamism.
Number 4, a strong, cohesive identity and a shared sense of community are essential for long-term survival.
Yeah.
It's about fostering that sense of belonging and purpose that unites individuals and transcends their differences.
Absolutely. Number 5, tolerance for experimentation and activities outside the core business fosters adaptability and allows companies to explore new possibilities.
Yeah.
It's about embracing a degree of creative chaos and allowing for those unexpected breakthroughs.
Number 6, conservative financing, avoiding excessive debt, is crucial for maintaining independence, flexibility, and long-term stability.
Yes.
It's about building that solid foundation that allows the company to weather storms and make strategic decisions.
Exactly. Number 7, flocking job mobility and knowledge sharing enhances organizational learning and facilitates the organic spread of knowledge throughout the company.
Number 8, companies should not be viewed solely as economic machines, but as communities of individuals united by a shared purpose.
Right.
Recognizing that human element is crucial for unlocking their full potential and fostering longevity.
Absolutely. Number 9, distributed power, as opposed to concentrated authority, promotes learning, adaptability, and resilience.
Yeah.
It's about empowering individuals at all levels to contribute, fostering a sense of ownership and shared responsibility.
And finally, number 10, these principles are not limited to the business world.
Right.
They can be applied to any organization or community we are a part of,
Yeah.
encouraging us to think differently about how we build for lasting impact.
That's a fantastic summary.
Yeah.
It's inspiring to think about how these insights can empower us to create organizations and communities that are not only successful, but also truly built to last.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the living company, I'd like to leave our listeners with a final thought to ponder. Knowing these principles of longevity, how can you apply them to the organizations and communities you are a part of? How can you cultivate sensitivity, cohesion, tolerance, prudence, flocking, and distributed power to create a more sustainable and thriving future?
Good questions.
It's something to think about as you continue your own journey of learning, adaptation, and growth.
Indeed, keep those minds curious and those perspectives open. Until next time, happy learning.